Thank you. And thank you all for being here on this very, very special night. Tonight, we have an opportunity to speak really intimately with amazing Amy Tan. She has given all of us an incredible gift. This book about birds is also an intimate look into her mind and her heart, and fundamentally the way that she thinks. Essentially, we have an opportunity to look into somebody's diary, into somebody's journal, and revealed in that is their curiosity, their motives, what they see in the world. All of us can look at the same phenomenon, but each of us will see a different thing. And tonight, we get to take a look through Amy's eyes and see the wonders and the humor and the joy that is outside our window every day. Please join me in giving a warm welcome for Amy Tan.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
I keep extensive journals and notebooks, and letting people look into those is a really personal thing. The process when you're out observing, what kind of the information that kind of comes raw into you, is that unfiltered experience reveals how we see. And I was thinking about how brave it was of you to open up your brain like that. Because people know you as an author, where you get to kind of work and sort of polish a thought and present it to people. But this is really about your brain and your experience.
Yeah. Fortunately, I didn't know that it was going to be published when I was doing it.
Okay.
I was just writing a diary of my backyard bird, the birds that I was seeing, but it was really doing nature journaling like everyone in our group does. I'm not sure. I need to say first that Jack is here, John Muir Laws is here, because he is the one who taught me how to do nature journaling. He's the one who taught me how to draw birds, okay? And this is not about how to draw a little circle and another bigger circle and to stick some feet on and, this is really about how you feel when you're in nature. That you're using your imagination and your curiosity and your endless questions, and you're coming away with a very personal take on something in front of you, and how do you get those notes down, and how do you draw that so that you can remember it for later. And that's what he did. So this book, everything that you see in it, and my ability to do it is because of Jack. So I'm just so glad we can be here tonight together. And also, what I've been telling people, that just so we get this out of the way, no, I didn't draw birds from the time I was 2 years old. I didn't start drawing birds until I started learning how to draw birds with Jack. And it takes a lot of practice, but anyone here can do the same thing, really. Go to johnmuirlaws.com and you can get his free videos and all kinds of things. And you just have to practice every day, at least draw a bird a day, and you can do it. So I'm here to tell you that.
Now, I think that the idea that, say, being able to draw or play a musical instrument or any of these things that we consider an art, or to write a book, is a gift. It's something that you magically have. But what that misses is the work, is the practice. And we totally get ourselves off the hook if we say, like, oh, I don't have the drawing gene. But you know, every person who you go like, oh my gosh, I like these drawings, they're making a lot of pictures.
Yeah.
So if we were to have done fMRIs of your brain before this project, and we looked at the shape of your brain, there would be regions of your brain that would be denser and thicker.
Yeah.
Now, all learning is physically changing the shape of your brain. So that was what we'd see in the fMRI.
I think so.
But
yeah.
what would we, if we just sort of went from your experience, I'm wondering about how this experience of dropping into deep observation of birds and journaling what you're observing and your own personal reflections about that, how have you perceived, how has that changed you?
Well, I do think that in a really amazing, wonderful way, that nature journaling, that includes drawing and writing down observations and kind of formulating these questions, has made me smarter. And that is because I can see things in a different way. I can stay attuned for longer, for hours, but also that amount of concentrated time allows me to use my brain differently. The other part of it is this relationship that I have with nature is so much deeper. To go out there and notice details, it takes in the entire habitat that is also known as my patio or my backyard, which has, trees, but you see how everything is connected and why this bird lives here and why this bird lives there. It also makes me more aware of my mortality in a strange way.
Tell me more about that.
Well, it's been part of my thinking since I've been a fiction writer, but I look at the wildlife in the backyard and I realize that their biggest goal every day is to survive. So these birds, especially the babies, if they don't eat within the day, they might die by the next day. So I'm aware of that, but I'm then aware of individuals, and I'm aware of myself and the fact that we're ephemeral in a way. And what I have to do as a writer is to put things down, and now also put things down in a drawing form that enables me to keep a remembrance. It is like an instant memoir. It's to keep that there for the future, because all of this stuff just goes away. And so it's just so wonderful to be able to put this in a journal and have this forever. And then whenever I look at the journal again, I'm there. I'm there in that moment. So I'm living my life, fully saturated by doing it this way.
So you've got a couple of different ideas in there that really resonate with me. One is you're talking about how the process of observing this way, taking what you see, putting it down in pictures, then adding words into it, in the moment you are paying a richer, deeper level of attention. And that's hard to do.
Yeah.
But it is palpable when we're journaling.
It is one of those kind of activities where you could just be doing it and suddenly you realize that 5 hours have gone by. And you're still there. You're still looking at these same things. You're still working something out. You're still dwelling on the same questions. And we don't give ourselves enough time to do things like that. Just stay in one place and dwell on one simple question about a bird in your yard. What is it doing and why is it doing that? Our notion of time is always so fragmented, especially these days. But nature journaling just takes you to a different world. So that's a good deal of my life these days is spent looking at that backyard and being in that backyard.
And so you're described sort of the habitat that you have created.
Yeah.
You have turned your home into a bird sanctuary.
Spa.
It's a bird spa. That's fair.
Massage, hydrotherapy. Yeah, yeah.
And
yeah.
the snacks are to die for.
Yeah, the snacks are really good. You have to imagine, I live in Sausalito. This is where most of this book takes place. And I have a lot of Pacific live oak trees. And they're about 100 years old. And I have other kind of vegetation and succulents and a succulent roof. And also I have a lot of bird food out there. And I started to make feeders. And then as I was getting more and more into it, I started to buy live mealworms. And I bought 3,000, then 5,000. And then they were eating so many of them, then I bought 10,000. And then I started buying 20,000.
How
and
long?
then I got a new refrigerator.
How long would that last you?
Well, they were eating during the nesting season. The baby birds were eating about 1,000 a day. They could eat more. Not one baby bird was eating it, but a lot of the birds that were nestlings that were or going to fledge, they were eating a lot. And so they would probably burn through 3,000 a day if I put 3,000 a day out there. Whatever I would put out, which would be a minimum of 1,000, it would be gone pretty quickly. Yeah.
And then you're also, when we look at the architecture of your home, these beautiful windows that allow you to see out. But then what you did with those windows is really interesting.
An art project.
An art project, because you fell in love with these little birds.
Yeah.
So,
one of the things that happens when you fall in love with a creature, whether it's a dog or a cat or, a bird, you're in love with an individual. And if you see that individual or any that look like that individual run into your window and die, you are absolutely crushed. And so I live in a house that is mostly windows on 3 sides, and it's kind of hard to avoid. But what I did is the artist in me, the new artist in me, got a water-based acrylic white pen, and I drew spider webs over all these view windows, so that it's like 8 by 12 feet expanse of windows that are just covered in spider webs. And people think it looks kind of cool, but it also works. The birds, they come, I see them coming toward the window, and then it's like they put on the brakes, and they see it, so it works. Yeah. I just don't want to see any more dead birds.
So you mentioned love. Could we put on the first slide? I've pulled out a page from your journal. I don't know if you're able to. Are you able to read this from where you're sitting?
I can't read it.
We're hoping that they can.
Yeah.
This is we're looking at a page from Amy's journal. And in it, we see her palm. And in that, there's a little red tablet sticking up and a hummingbird perched on the hand.
Yeah. And
this for someone who has seen a lot of kind of logos, let's care for the earth clip art, you might think that this is symbolic. But this is actually a recording of a real event. Could you kind of walk us through this experience and how that affected you?
Well, I had noticed that these hummingbirds, the males, which are the ones that have the flashing red heads when they turn in light in a certain way, that they were very protective of their feeders. And every time I went out, they would buzz me. And sometimes they'd stay right in front of me, and their little sword was looking right at me and very threatening, and their tails would fan out, and they're ready to attack. But even though they're very fierce like that, I had read that there was a possibility you could actually lure them to sit on your hand if you had these little feeders. And I thought, it's probably a scam. It's only $4, 4 for $10, it's a little too cheap to be real. But I decided hope was pretty cheap. It wasn't going to be a terrible waste of money. And I put that on there, and I did. I don't know where I learned this. I used to work with kids, and you kind of approximate the behavior you want somebody to do by setting things closer, doing a sort of approximation of what you want. So I'd put the feeder here on another place near me, and I would just wait, and then they'd investigate and then take off. And then I'd put it a little closer, and they'd investigate, and then they'd land, and they'd drink from it, and I'd think, oh, okay. So I'd closer and closer until eventually I put it on my hand. And I thought it would take a month for this to happen, but it happened all at once, and it just landed, and it started feeding. And I looked at the feathers on top of its head that, you know, you had done a class on how to draw these feathers that are in a graduated size going over the top of the head, and I could look at it, and I would do what Jack had taught me to do, which is you call out what you're looking at, you know, feathers in a row, all graduated in size, the very intense black eyes, a little white, you know, and just calling this out as I'm looking at this hummingbird. And at the end of that experience, it left, and then it came back again. And I was in love, you know, because this is somebody who, this creature acknowledged I was in his world and that he accepted me. And we're not friends, you know, we're not dating, we're just accepting each other. He's wild and I'm human. I pay mortgage, you know, he doesn't. But so there are these fundamental differences. But in that moment, we're united, we're together. And I was just absolutely in love. I was Dr. Doolittle at age 65, you know.
And once you fall in love like that, your world is forever changed.
Yeah.
It is. There's no going back.
Well, your eyes are open, your ears are open, and suddenly everywhere you go, you are aware. There are all these things that are happening. It's almost, I don't know, I wouldn't want to test this, but it's almost as if no matter where you go in the world or what's happening, you will never be bored because you will always notice something. You'll keep looking and you'll see more and more details, and it doesn't have to be just nature, but anything. And you'll start to see patterns, and you'll start to have questions, and you'll mull through this in your mind. It is part of my writer's mind to obsess on things like that, but now I have it also in this other way with nature journaling. So it's a way never to be bored as well.
And you mentioned that as part of that process, you're asking questions. Tell me, as I look through your book, I can see you. I think for a lot of people who kind of will study ornithology, you study, like, here are the things I now know about birds,
Yeah.
and now you think you understand birds. But what I'm seeing in every page of what you're doing is you are celebrating what you don't know and finding these little rabbit holes and free falling into these little mysteries. And you're pulling those out on the pages of the journal. I was wondering if you could sort of speak to kind of the role of curiosity in your work, but also, are there any things you are doing, because that is like grade A curiosity stuff that you're doing. Are there any strategies that you are using that we can adopt?
Yes, I think one of the great ones is you can follow a child around. And that's something I did. Well, Fiona, she's in the audience. She's not a child anymore. She's 21. But when I first met her, she was 13. And I noticed that this young woman was standing next to me asking a lot of questions. And I thought, oh, how annoying. And I thought, let's move away and get some nice quiet out in nature. And then after a while, I realized, I was trying to draw the pretty picture. Jack's talking. His whole thing is about intentional curiosity, how we're there, we observe, we feel the life force of things that are in front of us. And I'm just trying to do something really spectacular, but it's coming out bad. It's so bad, I just keep my pages covered and don't share like when everybody's sharing. But I see that Fiona is the one the one who has grasped what this really is about. You just ask questions. You are the beginner. You're somebody who is looking at something afresh. And when you're a kid, you are turning things over. You're looking at it from different angles. You're looking under, you're tasting, you're feeling, you're doing all of that. And we don't do that as much when we're adults. And suddenly I'm in this classroom with you guys. You're the leader, and Fiona's there, and other people my age are there, and we're learning to start over and see the world, really see it. And then after that, I started following Fiona around. And it was like, when you're in the 5th grade and somebody is smarter than you are in math, and you're doing the test and you're kind of looking to see what the answer is. And that's what I did. I would look at Fiona's sketchbook, and it's like, oh, okay, a good question. Yeah, good question. So that's what propels a lot of this, because the questions, every now and then I might find some part of an answer to the questions, but that wasn't really the point. The questions were driving my curiosity and enabling me to just keep noticing and noticing more and more and more and more. Some of my guesses might turn out to be wrong, but it didn't matter. And the good thing was, it was my own journal. So I didn't have to worry that somebody here was going to pay good money for this book and then go home and find out that what I'd written in there was incorrect about birds. And do not use this. Somebody, I think on Amazon or something, it's called a guide. It is not a guide, okay? It's an amateur person's journal of bird observations in her own backyard, just her birds. So that was what it was about.
And your passion for it, your curiosity, the intense curiosity, I see that in each thing. And that curiosity then motivates you to do the next page and the next page and the next page.
Yeah, each day. And what I was seeing also were those patterns of behavior I could see more and more. Like the first time that you see little baby fledglings jumping off something and you say, wow, that's so cute. Look at them. Look at how tubby they look, or this and that. And then after a while, you watch carefully and you see this little baby is imitating behavior of another parent or even a sibling and tapping the ground. Unfortunately, there's nothing where they're tapping. They have to learn so much. And then you start to learn what they're learning. You become the baby bird. And you're learning to pick up seeds that are too small or too big or that are actually poop and not bird seed. Or, how to swallow or how to defend. Curve. Yeah, it just goes on. It goes on, where you can just see more and more.
And as you're doing that, you're putting in pencil miles. So page after page after page after page, you say you're doing this for yourself.
Yeah.
You're motivated by these questions and curiosity, and what that does is gives you permission to make the next drawing.
Yeah.
So the purpose then is to learn more and celebrate more and just to do this kind of deep geeking out with the world. And if it's a pretty picture, great. If not, great, because it's really about the bird.
Yeah.
So maybe let's put up the next slide. What we've got here is a bunch of your drawings from different time periods. So these are all sort of this experience of just starting to make. How many journals have you think you've filled up now with birds?
Oh gosh, 20, 25, 30. I don't know. I have so many journals and loose pages together. I would say at least 30.
So 30 journals
40.
in the course of how many years?
7 years.
So 7 years, 40 journals.
Yeah.
So what's neat here is if you do it, it will come, right?
Buy cheap journals.
And if you look at so behind us is a giant slide with pictures of birds from this period, and over on the side you can see ones that that looks like an illustration out of a science textbook. but it looks alive. You can see the brain changing in these. Let's maybe even hit the next one. I think this is just a comparison of the same bird by the same artist 4 years apart. And what's going on here are pencil miles, and it makes those parts of your brain that are involved in paying attention and this process, the weird process of picking up your pen and doodling things, denser and bigger.
And you can feel that bird. The bird that was drawn in 2020, you can feel the shape of it.
Yeah.
My whole point in drawing these portraits of birds, these are very different from the sketches that are about behavioral observations. The portraits of the birds were the birds that looked at me, and I felt we had a relationship, that it's an individual, not a species. So I would draw it, but I always wanted to have the feeling that I caught the bird in the second just before it took off. You know, birds they take off, they don't stay unless you put a lot of mealworms down. They don't stay in one place.
You need a few thousand more.
A few thousand more. They'll just keep eating. Literally, they will, 15, 20, they'll just stay there and eat them. So you can get them to stay in one place, depending on food. But it was that feeling that I had caught this live creature, caught in the act, not caught physically, but
right.
That I can feel that, and I can feel myself as that bird. And that's what I get out of drawing these birds, and how I feel at the end when I look at it. It's very, very personal to me.
The science illustrator in me also notices that at the start, sort of the standard view that everybody draws of birds is a profile, because that's what we see in every field guide. Mm-hmm. So there's something in our brains that says the drawing of the bird is supposed to look that way. And then a few years later, and thousands of pictures of birds later, it's not about the field guide. It's about the bird that's in front of you.
Yeah.
It's gone from the way it's supposed to look to a much more kind of intimate connection with the creature.
And none of these colors, the colors are, in a way, they almost become arbitrary what you try to use. Sometimes there will be an effect that I want for myself, that I want to highlight some section of the body and there's light showing on it in a certain way. So there'll be shadows and colors will be darker, colors will be brighter. So there's always that representation of what you've seen that's very, very personal. And that's what I would feel with doing all of the portraits of the birds. It's funny, I look at this now, the California towhee that you found that picture of, and it is startling to me, what I was able to notice after a while. And when you see it's not simply the skill of using the pen, it really is that you're noticing a lot about that creature and what its life is all about.
So on one level, I see the thing that's easy to notice is that artistically, huge change. The thing that I am really excited about this book are what happens when, as you look out at birds, a lot of people would see a number of birds come to their feeder, they can have a list of them, and I have some technical observations in my notes. You're finding stories, and you're finding stories that are also very often really funny. And I'm looking through your field notes, and I'm laughing out loud at these things that the antics of these birds through the lens of your brain. Before this, I didn't really know just how funny you are.
I didn't know birds were so funny.
Let's put this next one up. So these are two different things here, and maybe just I'll describe what's on one panel, and what I'm really interested in is how do you look at things. I'm wondering, is this from your training as a writer? How is your, like, this is story brain meets naturalist brain. We're first looking up at a tree with all sorts of text blocks in it, things that crows are saying as they're chattering up in a tree. There are, I see a little sketch of a bird with a price tag on it, on a hook on a wire, hanging upside down. Another bird looking at that kind of ponderingly. There's another kind of pigeon off in the corner looking.
A stool pigeon.
That's the stool pigeon. Right? So tell us this story.
Like, the crime scene.
This is the genius of this. I look at this and I go like, wow, this is the kind of naturalist I want to be.
So what I do see every day when I look at things in the yard, I see drama. There's stories that every single time I look there and I see something going on, it's a drama. It includes conflicts, it includes like aggression. It's often funny. It's not always, usually it's not tragic. In this case, it looks like some tragedy happened because there's a bird that's hanging upside down with crossed eyes, instead of open eyes, so it looks like the bird has died. And I was getting
I just want to interrupt for a second. I know it's not polite to interrupt you, but the little tag next to that says...
It says $14.
Yeah, and murder of crow.
Murder of crow.
Like, I mean, just like there's puns in here too.
Murder of crow. The crows were coming more and more to the house, and they were going on the feeders and scaring all the little birds, and then they'd bring their young ones there, and they'd say, Junior, here's how you do it. You jump on this thing, and you shake it up, and all the seeds fall down, and you make this mess, and then the rats come. And so I needed to control the crows. How do I do that without damaging the crows or doing anything that I'd be in trouble with? People would really hate me if I did something terrible. This might be questionable, what I did. But I read that crows, they recognize their own, and if one of them dies, they will actually mourn these fallen comrades or family members. So I went and got this fake crow for $14 from Wild Birds Unlimited, and I roughed up the feathers a little, so it was like it had been in a great battle and had lost, unfortunately. And then I hung it upside down, and then suddenly there were crows coming from 4 directions, not just one. You would think that, the crows that come to our yard, they're coming from one direction, but they're coming everywhere. It's like they got on the WhatsApp, feature for networks and said, comrade, come quick, funeral at 5, And they were flying, and they went to the tree, and they were screaming and screaming. I think this is really interesting because I swear they do not know this bird. They do not recognize this bird because I bought this bird.
That's right.
and they're all looking. You have one that's kind of looking at it like, is this real? And anyway, Stool Pigeon says it was a human who did it, and she laughed, and I did. I laughed to see them all getting all upset. And then what happened was they stopped coming to the yard. So they're still in the tree, but they don't come to the yard to the feeders.
See, the conservationist in me appreciates that you're not, throwing rocks at your birds. You're putting up a puppet show for them.
Yes, exactly.
and the storytelling in this is epic. Whereas the kind of the biologist in me would like, crows deterred by model in yard, check, right? But this is when I was saying that this is such an intimate look into your brain and your thinking and your feeling and how you observe, how you make meaning, how you put the world together.
And how you solve problems. I had a lot of problems with this yard, and it was always such a wonderful puzzle to try and figure out, how do you defeat the rats? How do you defeat the squirrels?
Good luck on that.
All of that. And they were these puzzles, and I would do that. I'd think about it, and try something, and it would work for a while, and then it wouldn't. And, I just kept going. So that was part of the yard as well, trying to outsmart some very, very smart wildlife.
Well, good luck on that, because you have put out a banquet, not just the mealworms, but on the other side of this screen, we're seeing the menu that has been put out for these birds. So it's an illustrated menu, and are there, just so that the folks who are listening on the radio can get a feel for these, do you have a favorite one? I know you're not supposed to like put up a slide and read it. That's bad etiquette. But let's just on one of these, just to kind of give people there's a whole column down the side of all these little illustrations of the snacks.
Yeah, of all the different foods. And I started getting foods for different birds, like finches like seeds in Niger. Migrating birds, when they first arrive, they're very hungry, and they have to really dig in and fatten themselves up again. And so I get them suet. But then all these other creatures like the suet as well, like the squirrels. So then I started getting hot pepper suet. And it turns out that mammals have a lot of taste buds, but birds have few. And so it doesn't bother them. And I swear, I almost think they prefer the spicy one. Whether or not they can taste
salsa.
it, they seem to prefer the hot pepper suet. And it has, for me, it's like the best insect heads and antenna and body parts and cricket legs and all that in the suet that I get for my birds. And the great thing, and I'm mentioning this suet because it's a really popular dish among migrants who are coming to the yard in the winter to spend the winter in your yard, but also for some of our year-round birds, all the ground feeders like the juncos love the suet. And because it's soft and they're pecking away at it, they stay on the suet for a lot longer than if they take a seed. So I can draw field studies. I learned what food to put out there, or water, put lots of water bowls out there. What would birds be eating or drinking that would enable me to sketch them? And that was the top choice.
All right, so I'm just breaking all presentation etiquette where you read things that are on the screen. Just in case you're in the back and you can't read this, I'm going to read just the top one to you. And also for folks on our radio audience can hear. So there's a picture of the little chunk of suet, and it says to it, "Spicy suet, just like the stuff Mom used to throw up." Throw up for you. Includes seeds, insects, nasty mealworms, migratory star award. Right? So it's you've even got your own rating system for the treats that you put out there.
Sichuan, Sichuan seeds.
So any migratory birds listening to this, you got to get in on this. Let's maybe show up the next slide. Just another example of the stuff that you do. It is, if you try to drink a glass of milk while you're reading this book, it's going to come out your nose. Here what we're looking at is we've got a cluster of young jays here, of jays, and they are giving a hard time to a couple of owls. The owls are getting philosophical about it with thought balloons. And so just sort of talk us through your process of thinking and observing and what you are, what's kind of going on in your writer brain, naturalist brain, artist brain as you are kind of poking around on that page. And then we'll jump over to the other one.
I was very lucky in that I realized quickly through the help of a friend that whenever you hear a lot of crows or scrub jays, they're all in the corvid family, when you hear a lot of that possibly there's a hawk or an owl in the tree. So we raced out, and sure enough, there was this owl. And in fact, there were two owls. And this is back in July of 2 years ago. And it was a mom, a female, which is a lot larger than a male in general. And the male had a white head. It was a very young one. So she was teaching this male to hunt. What they do in the daytime is sleep. If they wake up, they do a little preening, and then they go back to sleep. So they do nothing. They must sleep, absolutely must sleep. But these crows and these scrub jays would come back, and they would hound them, just screaming at them. And so every now and then I'd see Junior, I called the young one Junior, and Mom was his mother, open their eyes and give this evil eye to the crows, or another hawk. And it was wonderful to see also how she was protecting him. She would often be, he would be on this side and she would be facing these corvids and or a hawk. But then I always made myself imagine that I was the owl or the bird or whatever it was. So then I would have these thought bubbles, and it would be like for Junior, it was like, it's noon, I need to sleep. There's a little girl down at the bottom, Lily, and she lives next door. She's my goddaughter's daughter, and she was about 4 or 5 then. And she would be screaming, at the birds. So I drew Lily down there because after screaming for a while, the owls did get disgusted and they flew further back into the tree so they wouldn't have to be seen. But yeah, I would just, this is daily things that I would see with the owls. They look like this. They're just sleeping like this. And then when they notice something, they go like this. And then when they see something down below, they're like this. It's frightening. I have a 4-pound dog, and I was very afraid that the owl I loved would take the dog that I loved, and I ended up screening in my whole 2 porches in our house. We screened in completely until we discovered that these owls do nothing but sleep during the daytime. And we didn't really have to worry.
And then you've also gotten really good at noticing micro expressions. In owls.
I don't know what kind of mood I was in. I drew, and it was like I spent 6 years looking at birds, and I finally decided I've made some startling scientific discoveries, like all the different expressions that owls make. And you see 6 of them. And one was easy. It was a throwaway. It was resting face. And then the next one is sexy face, only it looks like resting face. And then there's happy face, which looks kind of like sexy face, which looks like resting face. Mother love face, hangry face, and attack human face. I've been thanked by many for that attack human face, that people know what to look for when they flee.
It's an important safety
when
tip.
When they need to flee, yeah. So
it's fun. It's joyful. It's absolutely goofy. And
I never knew how goofy it was until people started looking at these things, apart from me, and I thought, yeah, it's being silly, but people loved it, And
we made a T-shirt out of it.
Yeah, you made a T-shirt out of it.
So
I still need to get that T-shirt. And
it is.
Yeah.
It's.
Anyway,
to go. So what's behind this is deep, careful observation that leads to a profound connection and love, and then your playfulness can kind of come out and engage with that as well. Let's hit the next slide as I'll kind of give you more of a sense for this. Like with what's going on here this is an example of things where Amy is making profound scientific observations. With the owl thing, for the radio audience, all the owl faces looked the same. Right? That's what was going on with it.
Yeah.
The sexy face, they were all looked the same.
They all looked the same.
But we're now looking at a bunch of illustrations of postures of jays around a little dish of mealworms.
Yeah.
And you are picking up on real subtleties in the body language of the jays that are around you. And I think that this is significant because people say like what's so important about like looking at the birds in your outside your window? It's that if we pay attention to the world, there's so much in every moment that is going on. It doesn't matter if it's birds, but what we need to do is to pay attention.
I started feeling that there were a lot of little movements that the birds were doing combined with where their eye contact was, whether they looked away or looked at the other bird or at the food or the target or whatever, but also these micro movements of the wings. And Fiona and I looked at this together once with a fox sparrow to see when they are advancing on one another, what do these movements mean if they repeat them, and in what direction? So you can follow into this deep hole of questions and keep watching. So in one of these scenes, I started paying attention to what these juvenile scrub jays were doing. Now, not that long before, these scrub jays were sibling fledglings, so they were much younger. They were exploring the yard together. They shared food together. They did not fight over food. They were quite cooperative. One was a leader, and they would follow, the leader around. Well, later they became juveniles, and a very hot day, 100 degrees, the mealworms that I had put out for the songbirds died. These were very expensive mealworms. And it was unfortunate. They were black, they didn't smell good, and the songbirds would not touch them. And I put them in a bowl and I set them aside. And lo and behold, the corvids loved dead, smelly black mealworms. So there was actually a fight between a scrub jay and a mourning dove. You think of these mourning doves as being peaceful and marital happiness, and let's settle our differences. No, the mourning dove would bloat up. It looked like the Hulk, and it was like eyes were bulging, all these feathers are in big piles, and they have huge talons, and they would come toward the scrub jays and with their talons and grab at them, and they'd go in the air like this. And I thought, wow, this is not so peaceful. And then I saw what the scrub jays were doing. Like some of them had different postures for running away or going towards somebody, or how close they would get to the back of another bird to chase them away, or nonchalant looking away, pretending like I don't notice what you're doing, and then I'm going to come around and attack you from the back. They would do all these things. Well, one was especially clever, I thought. That one went up to the branch that was above that pan with the dead mealworms, and it was pounding on something, kind of like a woodpecker, but I didn't understand what it was doing. And suddenly the acorn fell in the middle of the bowl, and the birds scattered. And then he came down and he looked at his handiwork, and I thought, whoa, was that deliberate? Was he really just, you do have to ask this. I'm not a scientist, but you can go through the process and say, was he really just looking for an acorn and he happened to drop it there? Or was he aware of the trajectory of the acorn? Was he hoping for it to hit when another bird was in there, so it hit the head? All these questions you could, endless questions.
And so what you're doing there that I want to sort of, the scientist in me gives mad respect for, is that it would be easy to, in storytelling mode, because the stories are wonderful, to say, oh, this bird did this to do this. But what you did is you're keeping also, as you're doing this, the humility of science, saying perhaps it's to do this. I wonder if, I'm hearing kind of the sort of an intentional language of uncertainty.
Mm-hmm. Trying to always maintain that level of uncertainty, the beginner's mind, the idea I'm still open to seeing something. I find that once I identify something, once I say facts and figures, it closes the door. And as long as I know that I'm looking at behavior, it's just always going to be open. So on the other side, there is a drawing of an older scrub jay that was trying to problem solve how to break into a songbird feeder cage, a square cage that I had made. And this scrub jay would stick its bill in. There was a bowl of suet in the middle of the cage. It's too far for him to reach comfortably, but he would nudge it with his bill, pressing against something else, and eventually the bill would migrate over to the edge of the one side of the cage, and he would eat up the suet. So then I put it on a silicone pad so it wouldn't slide. And the next day, there was a lot of white silicone confetti all over the flagstone. And then I took branches and I wound it around so he couldn't stick his head in. And the next day, all the branches were on the ground. Then I got really heavy poles, like dowels, and I put that in there. And the next day, they'd been sawed in half. And then I put bricks around the whole bowl because he couldn't move the brick. And the next day I saw it stuck its entire head inside, guillotine style, to eat that. I mean, taking a huge risk, in my opinion, for that food, and
What's the spicy suet?
It just had, it made me think, these are the skills this bird has had all along and has used different elements of that to survive. But also, when does it decide it's worth the risk to do something crazy like stick the whole head in there? Because he had a hard time extracting the head. So he could have been attacked from the back. He could have been attacked from the front. No, I mean, his head is, these openings are this big, okay? It somehow managed to squeeze its whole head inside, and then it was, is kind of hard to extricate.
Yeah, and when biologists look at what birds are the smartest, there are these bird IQ tests. And we find that corvids, the group that includes jays, crows, and all these sort of things, they're just at the top of the list. They're up there with parrots, species that live in colonies. So things like gray parrots, they're really smart birds. These guys also, they're part of, so these are really, these are like the mastermind birds.
Well, I find the more I look at birds, the more I feel that many, many birds are far smarter than we think. And that if only we see what motivates them and what they need and what their cluster of skills are, that we would see examples more of that kind of problem-solving intelligence. And I had a house finch do that with me. It was, we don't think of house finches as being that smart. They come, they take 4 seeds, they throw 4 seeds on the ground, and they eat one. So you have this mess in your yard, right? What's smart about that? Okay?
That bugs me.
Turns out there is something about that, and our friend Bernd Heinrich did the research, and it's because they're looking for the deepest, oiliest seeds, the most bang for the buck. But, that's when they're flying 20,000 miles, to get someplace. And I'm saying, you guys are flying 20 feet. You don't need to throw the seeds on the ground. But anyway, the house finch, one day, this female house finch is going back and forth in front of the window, the one I covered with spider webs, and it's looking at me. Now, people will say, oh, that's because they see their reflection, it's mating, they want to fight. No, this is a female, and it's not fighting, it's not pecking at the window, it's just looking at me going, it has to kind of fly because they can't, hummingbirds can do that, but they're sort of going, so she's going back and forth, staring at me. And then I just don't get it. And then she goes over to a net, a hoop net, where there's another big feeder, and it's filled, and goes and sits on that feeder and looks at me, and then she goes back to the other side where I'm, and she does that again. And finally I notice her favorite feeder is empty, okay? That is what she's flying in front of. She's flying in front of that.
Do you think
she's going there looking, she's going to where the seeds are, and she's looking at me. And then she comes back. It's in her mind, it's like, how stupid are you? I'm trying to tell you, look, there's seeds here. There are no seeds here. I'm going back and forth showing you, and finally I get it. And so I go outside, and the house finch goes and sits on the rail while I fill that little feeder that's stuck to the window, and she goes and she feeds from that for a bit, and then she flies away. So
Flies back home, sits around the nest, says to the male house finch, you know, it takes a while, but you really can train these humans.
Yeah, exactly.
They're not as dumb as they seem.
Exactly. We have to be smarter to be able to recognize how smart they are. They are so smart. And the more I watch these birds, I realize it's not just the corvids, you know. All of these birds are smart in their way.
So as I look at these pages, let's maybe put up the next one as well. What kind of comes to my mind is when I think about paying attention, I believe that the act of paying attention is love itself. That love is the act of sustained, compassionate attention. And what I'm seeing on each one of these pages is a love poem to that bird.
I definitely love these birds. Yeah.
And how, as you've done this, how has your connection to the natural world changed? And how has that connection changed you in your behaviors and your motivations?
Yeah. Well, you know, as I said, I just feel like one of the goals as a writer that I've always had is to be able to feel more deeply. And it's something that my mother had a desperate need for, to feel deeply. And she was distressed that I could never feel as deeply as she did, which I'd never wanted to feel as deeply as she did because she was a little difficult. But with the birds, you know, I find that I am, by trying to feel the birds, by trying to, you know, imagine I am the bird, I am able to feel so much more deeply now when I'm in nature with things that are, where you don't have to have something come back and give you something, where you have to have this immediate feedback of, you say, I love you, and the other person has to say, I love you. And, you know, you find your levels of deepness in different ways over time. But the birds don't ask anything of me, or maybe they do when they look at and they fly back and forth and they want the seeds. But they're just there for me to love. As a result of that, I always feel that if you learn to love one creature, one dog, one pet, one wild bird, you are going to want to save that individual if anything happens to that individual. And that carries over in your wanting to then save others like it. So if you love birds, you want to save birds. So as a result, I've gotten into conservation related to birds. So I'm on the board of American Bird Conservancy, and I do things with Point Blue Conservation Science. I'm on their Art and Science Committee with Jack. And also Wild Care. I will be doing a benefit for them tomorrow. So they're the ones who do rehab, and I've taken birds to them, not just birds from my yard, but birds I found at a beach or whatever. And it makes me think also about moral questions. For example, I often hear this expression, people will see a bird eating another bird, or a coyote eating another animal, and they'll say circle of life. It just immediately comes out of their mouth, circle of life. And what I've taken it for is not just some kind of scientific notion that we have this order of sustenance in the world, but it's like, let's not get disturbed about this circle of life. We don't have to care about this. This is necessary. It may be necessary, but I hate that expression now because it's deadening. to say circle of life, don't feel bad about it. I think we can still feel bad. And we can also know it's necessary for hawks to eat other birds, and all of that is part of it. So that question, and then at the same time I thought, okay, now I feel bad for any bird taken by a hawk, but I also feel bad if a hawk dies of starvation. What about these mealworms? Should I feel bad about the mealworms?
Circle of life.
I mean, phylogenetically, does sympathy stop at a certain point? And I see these mealworms, and they're like trying to crawl out, and you see that they're making these little hissy sounds, and I know it's like, help, that's terrible thing's gonna happen, and I start feeling bad about them. And then I felt bad about the yellow jackets that were eating the mealworms live, and then I felt bad when I put out a trap for the yellow jackets, and the yellow jackets went in that, and then they were drowning, and the other yellow jackets came, and they were looking at, and they recognized each other, it seems, and then suddenly one of them inside that was drowning said something, and they all took off, and it was like, what did she say? Like, you're next. So I have these questions about sympathy having to do with animals and wildlife. Do you feel you love your dog, you love your birds, but at what point do you stop thinking about the death of other animals, of other creatures? And it's a very deep place to go into. I don't recommend that you always have to do that 10 hours a day, but that's the kind of thing that I would do. And found to be, an interesting, productive way for me to look at things, of who belongs, who deserves our sympathy, and we can extrapolate this out, in terms of human terms, how we make these decisions. So there are a lot of parallels in looking at any kind of wildlife and how you feel about the sanctity of life. And I've been spending a great deal of time thinking about that question. There was another one that really I would hear a lot of, and that would be, it's an invasive bird. It's a house sparrow. It's a starling. It's an invasive bird. This is when somebody's picked up an injured bird and said, what should I do with this? And invariably, somebody on a Facebook page would answer, it's invasive, kill it, doesn't belong here. And it got me to the core, because this is the kind of rhetoric that is thrown around with migrants. And, you don't belong here, get rid of them. They don't belong here. They don't deserve our sympathy. They don't deserve anything, get rid of them. And my parents were illegal, and they were in that situation. They don't belong here, get rid of them, kill them. So I have very strong feelings personally when I hear people say, doesn't belong here, it's an invasive species, kill it. But that's my thing. That's just how my experiences. So it's always, your own experiences in life, your own morality, the, kind of tormenting questions you ask yourself, all get funneled in there and come back, and they just keep making me think and feel.
To think and to feel.
And feel, yeah.
And this kind of journaling is practice in that kind of thinking and feeling. That you're essentially training yourself to care.
In ways that I never imagined, or it just, we as kids, I remember times, you'd accidentally step on a caterpillar and you'd just say, wow, it's so yellow. But, as you get older and with different creatures, you get this different sense about what the life of the animal means. And I admit that, I don't have a particular religion that I follow, but every now and then the whole Buddhist one, whereas if you accidentally kill things, you'll come back as that creature. So I sometimes, I'm thinking I'm going to be a mealworm for a really, really long time. And I have to ponder these things. Yeah. Anyway, it's...
And I really appreciate that that's a great example of you've got a question and there isn't an answer.
Oh.
And that it's okay to be in that complexity.
And that's the thing about a novel, that you will, if you want to know how a novel is put together, well, you have to find the story. Fortunately, in The Yard, the story is right there in front of you. It's a very brief story, but it is right there, But what you're looking for often in starting a novel is conflict, a crisis, a dilemma, a person whose character is out disjointed from what is happening right now in the situation. So it's always something uncomfortable that pushes you to examine something more closely and to find understanding. It's not one answer, it's all facets of that, and why that is complex, and why that becomes a longer and longer story, and that it's only the story that can explain what this true conflict is about. And those same skills that I've been honing as a writer has gone into making the observations, where I'm looking for the conflict. I'm looking for the possible resolutions and the outcomes, and what happened to the other birds at the same time. But then I see it reflected back to me with so much I don't know. So there's that huge difference that the questions are much more open when I'm looking at nature.
And the perspective shifting is also really interesting. You're kind of getting into the brains of these different birds, as well as yourself or the little girl who lives next door.
Yes, for Lily. Another very special little girl in the audience today, one of my first readers, is Amara. She's not quite 3, but when Amara first looked at my book, she took it around to people in the room and she said, "Amy wrote that?" She kept telling me, "Amy wrote that?
Yeah.
Amy wrote that." Anyway, yeah. I will say, this has become very important to me because when you, as you know, and you've talked about this with many, many people, our future are our children. I don't have children. I have a goddaughter and her children. And I love trying to introduce them to nature because I recognize they are the stewards of our world after this, the people who are going to care about these birds or about the land that they live on. We'll go with Beth and Fiona and go find pellets that the owls have regurgitated with the kids. I'm anticipating the kids are going to say, "Oh, that's gross." No, and instead you want to pick up a bunch of pellets that an owl threw up. Yes, we want to do that. I'm so happy, that they like to do this kind of thing. And we talk about the sanctity of life. We talk about the sanctity of feathers. They have found owl feathers in the yard. And I do have to tell them that there are these laws where you cannot take these feathers for yourself. And you, fish and wildlife, actually, you can't collect these things because who knows, you might say you just found them and somebody else has killed the bird to, get these same feathers. Anyway, in imbuing them with also that sense of responsibility for the beauty that you get to enjoy, and just say, you're the guardian of the feather. You don't own it. You don't get to keep it. You can put it out, keep it outside where you found it, but that kind of thing. And to see them take such interest now in nature, in birds, in animals, it gives me hope.
I was just thinking that it gives us hope.
It gives us hope. Yeah. Yeah.
Let that sink in for a moment. Yes. I know that there's a lot of people in this room who also have questions. And we're going to take a moment with some walk-around microphones to allow you, if you'd like to be part of this conversation and share your questions with Amy, we're going to have an opportunity to do that. So if you have a question, there's going to be a few people going around with microphones, and you just raise your paw, and they'll notice. And if you could stand up, then it'll be easier for us here to see you. Now the lights have come up, and look at all of you beautiful people. We're really happy to be here with you tonight.
This first question comes from your right in the front.
Hi. Sorry.
Hi.
Thank you so much. This is delightful. I'm an amateur bird lover too. I'm curious what made you go to the first class with John, and if learning all of this about birds made you change your own eating habits, for example.
It was 2016, and there was a lot of divisiveness, if you recall, in this country. And some of it included racism, open racism, that was so open it made me realize that maybe there was a lot more of it that had been there all along but had not been overt. And now more of it was being directed also to Asian Americans. Blacks and Latinos have always gotten their unfair share of that. Rudeness, epithets, violent sounding words, and now this was happening to Asian Americans, and I got some of it myself. And it was depressing, absolutely, in despair that this is how ugly our world had become, and how would I ever not understand that again, that it was out there. And I needed to go find a way to stop thinking about this. And that's when I decided to go into nature. A few years before, at a fundraising benefit for the publishing house, Heyday, went with a friend, and Jack was for sale. He was for sale, a 1 hour or two or 3 hour drawing session with him in the field. And it was Las Galinas.
We went to a sewage treatment plant.
The sewage treatment. Gallinas, we call it Gallinas, Gallinas. Las Gallinas, and then we were there, and I was able to invite as many friends as I wanted. So I think we had 10 people there, and we went around. But again, I wasn't listening. You had all these really great lessons, and I remember thinking, no, I'm just going to draw a really great bird and really be impressive. But now the bird didn't look very good. And all those lessons you talked about shapes and things that were adjacent and how you do this and where bird actually sits in the water, and it took me a while, but I remembered it. And so I needed to go back into nature, and I wanted to take these classes, and I wanted to learn how to draw, which is something I loved to do when I was a child and stopped when I was told I had no imagination. I decided that I would do this, draw, be in nature, find love and beauty, and not this hatred.
And not?
Not the hatred going on at the time. Not think about that, not let that be the guiding point of my life, and seek something else. No. I think a lot of people got reset during the shutdown in the same way, whether, or maybe with the other turmoil that you were finding, but I think a lot of people it was a scary time. And we all found our ways to get through it, but a lot of people ended up turning to nature.
There's the research is so clear on the impact on our peace of mind and how we treat each other and our sense of hope.
Yeah.
We need nature.
Yeah.
And now, because of our power, nature needs us. So we need nature to help us keep that sort of peaceful place in us. And nature needs stewards and conservationists and people who care, who can vote and take action. That's us.
Yeah.
This next question comes from the back on your right.
Thank you so much, Amy, for such a lovely and fun talk. So I grew up in China. I watched the Joy Luck Club movie when I was 6 years old. And then I read all your books. And now I'm a stand-up comedian, so my Chinese mom called me loser. And I'm just wondering whether you have any plans to write any comedy books, because you are so funny.
Yeah, this last one I wrote is a comedy book, it turns out. You know, I love comedy. I love watching stand-up comics, for one thing. So congratulations on your career. I love that. But I also find humor is just so absolutely important in whatever form. I find that I included a lot in my work, and I think for the first time people are seeing that in this book, but that's also because it's a much looser book. You know, you can't be writing a book that's super serious and every now and then you just make it a crack up. Yeah, no, it's hard work being a comic. You have to be processing things so quickly and find these analogies that meet together at a real odd angle that bears truth. And I really admire that skill. But birds provide that for me.
This next question comes from the front on your left.
Okay.
Thank you so much. It was a wonderful time getting to know you because I love your books. But since you have developed this love of birds and animals, are you a vegan?
Oh, I've been vegan, for a while. I was since 2000. And then I went to pescatarian because I traveled to different areas of the world that had, like if you go to Spain, you have Casa de Jamón. Casa de Jamón is all ham. And so I couldn't eat anything when I went to certain places, so I started eating fish. But I've been vegan now, solidly vegan, for the last 6 or 7 years, maybe longer. I've not had eaten birds in a very, very long time. So probably since 2000.
This next question comes from the back in the center.
Thank you both for a great performance and introduction, Jack and Amy. Real quick, your treatise on nature and how much it inspires us, empowers us, goes back to Rachel Carson. You know, if we seek out questions and observations in nature, she says we will have so much strength and inner power that it will last as long as life lasts. And then you get to Richard Louv, and I want to address this question to you. Do you agree with his Last Child in the Woods treatise and nature principle that now the more tech we have, the more nature smart we maybe need to be to develop the biomimicry and grounded personal success of each person to be self-directed and have autonomy, mastery, and purpose over their domain? Just thank you for doing all you're doing, Jack and Amy, for spreading the word to the people of the world, from an artist, a writer, to now a birder. It can happen to anybody, so
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah. I'm not sure I can answer that question. It's a very complex and very important one at the same time. I don't know enough about that intermix. We're often very afraid of anything to do with AI, and that goes along with the fear of anything that's unknown that might alter our lives. But I will say that there is room for tech and wildlife. For example, there's a program that I know American Bird Conservancy has been involved with, and that is the engineering of mosquitoes that are infertile, that are released in certain areas of Hawaii where there is a malarial kind of mosquito that is killing off the birds. And without that intervention, that species of birds would be gone in a very short while. So that is a program that is working. There are other tech things that are being done and in tandem with conservation, always monitoring what's going out there in the habitat. But I think that, those are tools, and all of us, part of it is making sure that everybody has access to those tools so they can choose and start doing something that they find that's important if, for example, they want to work in conservation, and look at the ways that that can be done with new methods, new technologies. But as I said, I don't know that much about AI or a lot of the tech. Just
What it makes me think about is all the competing attention for our attention. Our attention, our love, is the most valuable commodity that all of those tech companies are trying to compete for. Yeah. And how are we going to spend our energy? Some of the best minds in psychology are trying to get us to keep swiping and to keep swiping. And they're really good at developing those systems. And then we turn those on children. If we're able to put those aside, nature is still right outside your window, or maybe even inside your house. And to bring our attention back to each other, to family, to our community, how we spend our attention is one of the most important decisions that we can make. But the incredibly sophisticated systems that are trying to grab that and monetize it, I think are a threat to our well-being and happiness and community.
Yeah.
Hello, I just wanted to say thank you so much. It's such a treat for me to see both you, Amy Tan, and Jack Muir Laws. I've been such a great fan, and I subscribe to your YouTube channel. And I guess the biggest thing that nature journaling has done for me is that somebody has said we spend so much time worrying about the future or being anxious about the past that we never spend time in the present. And I think
In the
that's
moment,
what
yes.
it has done for me, is that like what you're doing is just being able to focus on the details of what's going on. And so my question though is, what is in your kit? Because I know that I see the details that you have that are very fine with the feathers, and is it colored pencils?
Yeah, it is colored pencil. I'm learning how to use watercolor now and gouache, thanks to a kit that Jack got me and also Beth and Fiona got me. But I started off with graphite, just plain old pencil and very, very cheap paper, because I didn't want to feel stymied that I had to make everything perfect, and if it was very cheap, that I could just keep practicing making mistakes. So I have a lot of really good paints and really terrible paper. I have different kinds of colored pencils, but I will say that your choice of these materials really depends on what you want to draw and what you feel you want to develop. And I did not follow Jack's advice, which is you do not need everything all at once. And I did buy a lot of everything, and now there's stuff that I will never use. So you really should, just go easy into the materials. It's really fun to have something, because when I was growing up, I had a charcoal pencil, and that was it. So this time I had colored pencils, and I have a little stylus, and sometimes I make little grooves on the paper to draw feathers, or I use my eraser almost like another colored pencil, or just so many. I use a magnifying glass, because if I want to see exactly how these colors are blending together, I can see it more carefully with a magnifying glass. I learned a tip from David Sibley, which is, I don't know if he wrote the foreword, but he's also, one of our great guides. Wrote great bird guide, and also he's a wonderful painter. But the trick is to draw on a very, very large format. So when they shrink it down to a page, it looks perfect.
Yes. That's right.
Right? Instead of drawing really small and then having it be enlarged. And then you say, oh my God, that looks terrible. But yeah, and I tend to draw large. And I think it's good when you're just learning to do something, to give yourself enough space on the page to write the notes and also to do the drawing and not feel confined. If you only have room for like this to draw the bird, just do the head, don't do the whole bird. That's my advice to myself, so that I can get as much on there, whatever detail I want on there, or no detail. I think it's always fun to just do something super quick, just a gesture of what it is, and then write more notes. But the notes are really, really important, and I think it can go beyond. Oftentimes we are putting down information like the color. Well, there's many different colors, and so we start putting that down, and we come to realize this notion. But we might put down size, but there's so much more about these creatures, birds, just what happens when their shapes shift. Jack had us do a lesson in which we drew birds with suddenly their necks are longer, suddenly you don't see their legs, or now you see them, or now they've inflated themselves, and you get to learn all the ways that animals are shapeshifters. And that was really interesting to me. Like, why do they change? What are the reasons why they change, and how fast can they change? Looking at that, you could, if you were a student in biology, you could take any one of these questions and study it for the next few years, as it leads to another thing. It's so fascinating that it's all there. But that, when people were talking about the future, there's this thing that we all go through of looking at the future. We have worries that lie there. We have things in the past, sadnesses, whatever, things that never got said, that should have been said. We have worries there, or sort of sad reflections. But in the moment, you get to shape that. In the moment there with these birds, you're right. Every single moment counts, and I'm so present. It was truly one of the few times that I have been absolutely present in that moment, not thinking ahead, not thinking behind, just there.
Every moment counts. Your curiosity, your joy in this is palpable. I can feel you, as you're sitting here, feel like you want to now say goodbye to everybody here and go back on your porch and look at the birds.
I know.
But the skills that you have developed that makes this so consuming, so much fun, so life-giving, are skills that we can all develop, that we can all learn. It is not a gift that, you're lucky to be born with the birding gene.
Yeah, no.
Right?
I never drew birds before. Yeah, I didn't notice birds.
It's what we do that makes a difference. And if you show up for nature, and with a journal in your hand is such a powerful way to make your brain show up. the journal short circuits all the kind of lazy habits that our brain does that kind of get us just kind of to ruminate. It keeps you out there with the bird and paying attention to the next moment, the next moment, the next moment.
Yeah.
And you can learn to do this if you choose to do it. And if you decide to do something else, that's also good. Like, again, our attention and what we decide to do with each moment of our life, that's your choice. But you have the power to open up this door if you choose to. And I think you'd agree that should you choose to do that, it is transformative in your world and your life. And you can do it. It's not a genetic thing. It's not like, oh, you're so lucky to be born with, with the art gene. It's that you put in 40 journals.
Thousands of hours drawing. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's fun.
It's fun.
It's fun.
And I totally get it. So look at how much fun she's having.
Yeah.
Go do that.
It's fun. Yeah. You just learn to carry a little sketchbook with a little pencil in your bag or your pocket all the time. And you just do it. And you notice something and you just make a little note and do a little drawing. And you've just saved that day for the future. Yeah.
So I've got one more question for you. Again, I mentioned at the start that I think what you have done is really brave, because people identify you as a writer and by your successes. And people in marketing would like you to stay branded, right? This is off-brand, right? This is taking a risk. This is going outside of your comfort zone and growing as an observer, as a human being. And I think to do that publicly takes a lot of courage. I was wondering, what for you is now your growth edge as you are kind of looking forward? What are areas that you see that you might want to further develop, to continue to challenge yourself, to continue to open your heart and your mind to the world that you are in?
Well, as far as doing more journaling of the backyard, I have to sit back and assess to myself how many barriers I have there unknowingly that keep me from looking further. So, for example, I don't spend a lot of time looking up at the canopy where there are tons and tons of birds, and what I need to do is also learn to draw the canopy and draw the birds that are up there and what they're doing away from the feeders and how that differs in their behavior for when they come to the feeder. So I want to have a sense of their natural life without my interference with a feeder and a cage feeder that they eat out of. There are certain things I want to be able to draw, add to my skill set, like being able to draw a landscape with watercolors, to be able to suggest things more. And I have, for every set of birds, I have these different behaviors that I want to follow. I don't want to do it too methodically, the way that, you learn to do things usually. I want it to be spontaneous and have this freedom that's still part of it. But there are definitely a lot of different questions that I have that I want to continue to keep looking at that and draw these details and begin to see possible patterns. What happens is if you already see the pattern, then you don't see the details and you stop looking. And so I need to go back and go backwards to look at those details and refine the patterns or new patterns. So that's what I'm always going to be looking for, It'll merge also with my fiction, and all of these things that I do, despite what my art teacher said, that I had no imagination or creativity. I feel that the creative aspects of what I'm doing with the journal and with my fiction writing merge, and they are similar. They feed each other. The whole notion of compassion is always a part of writing a novel. And so I will ask myself more questions about what that compassion means, and if I am at all biased in a way as to which characters or which situations evoke my sympathy or not.
I know I said that was the last question, but what you just said then prompted this other question. That's the problem
See,
with
this
curiosity.
is the danger.
That's the danger.
This is the danger, yeah.
Is it okay if I ask another question? They said yes. Okay. So you mentioned this art teacher who says you have no creativity.
No imagination.
No imagination.
Which is like boring.
And so that voice, along with the person who criticized your art, shut you down. But you have moved past that. The voice that we have in our heads, the inner critic that says you can't, stay in your lane, this is not for you, you can't do this. How have you either redirected that, tamed it, changed the nature of the conversation? How have you tackled or made friends with and tickled your inner critic?
Yeah.
And what is that voice like for you? Because that's something for any of us that we would have to.
The inner critic is the worst critic, because it doesn't shut up. And it's in there and it's telling you everything, and it's the voice of existential death, which means you never had it, you never get it again, you give it up, you're over. Your existential self as a writer, as a journalist, or whatever, it is over. So that is constantly there, and especially acute when I finish a book. But I will use as kind of an interesting analog for how you can confront this by what happened with the actual teacher who wrote this thing about me. He has said lacks imagination necessary to a deeper creative level. And I would see this guy in my dreams. Whenever I did anything, I could have written a novel and he would be there, and he would always be, always disapproving. He's a Brit. He was 6 years older than I was in high school. He was very cute, so I had a crush on him. And it turned out he had a crush on me. He wrote me nasty letters when I left high school. But what happened was I started, as an adult, many years later, I got in touch with him. And I said I had these museum passes. Would you like to have them? And he showed up. And I met this man again. He was no longer the cute young art teacher. He was a regular human being. And he was very grateful to get the tickets. But after seeing he was a regular human being, he had no hold over my life, he disappeared from my dreams. He got nice tickets, but he is out of my dreams. So he doesn't approve of anything that I do. He doesn't disapprove or approve. He's just somebody, who he's despite what he said, he's a pretty nice guy.
Amy, thank you for this book. Thank you for your books that have inspired inquiry and reflection in so many of us, and for this conversation tonight. It has really been a delight and an honor to pick your brain about these sorts of things and celebrate this beautiful world that we live in.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you very much. Thanks for coming.
So we will be signing books in the lobby in just a moment. We're so grateful to all of you for being here tonight. Go out and celebrate this world and make change.